Hey guys, Zane here with another One Take review, and today I want to talk about the Gang Starr album Step in the Arena. In 1989, Gang Starr debuted with the album No More Mr. Nice Guy, which in retrospect was a very underwhelming record. It really doesn't stand out in any particular way, and frankly, the majority of it is completely forgettable, and it certainly doesn't have the makings of a band that would go on to become utter legends of hip-hop. Step in the Arena, although far from perfect to be sure, definitely is in a more legacy-adjacent position. That being said, the record does definitely have its flaws as well. Much of the record centers itself around a good but not great sense of quality. For example, our main MC here, Guru, half of Gang Starr, does some strong work here, it's just far from his best. There are times where he feels less confident than he eventually would sound on later releases, and tracks like Execution of a Chump feel significantly weaker than they otherwise should have had he just had a bit more power in his voice. That being said, his flow is already absolutely fantastic, and as he monotonously sways through carefully constructed verses is undeniably impressive. His lyrical abilities are, for the most part anyway, on point as well, though again not as great as they would later be, but certain tracks have some great storytelling, like the song Just to Get a Rep, a crime-related story that is just as engaging as it is well-penned. Making up the other half of Gang Starr is the equally, if not slightly more legendary DJ Premier. The duo's debut, No More Mr. Nice Guy, kind of felt like very basic hip-hop for the time in the late 80s, but DJ Premier finally found his own specific niche and style on this record. That being said, this isn't his best work either, but similar to how Guru was starting to find his feet as a performer, DJ Premier sees Step in the Arena as a place to find his feet as a producer, a sampler, and a general DJ. Many of his samples are reliant on old-school hip-hop kind of sounds, and his usage of scratches are rooted directly in the old culture of hip-hop, but at the same time, he does involve himself in a number of other musical cultures as well, resulting in something that still sounds mostly, for the most part, fresh, though not entirely. It's still slightly dated, of course. I mean, hey, this came out the early 90s. What can you expect from early 90s hip-hop for the most part, unless it's a Tribe Called Quest? But nonetheless, my point still stands. DJ Premier kind of found himself here, just not entirely. Many of his beats here feel slightly underdeveloped in the comparison to later works that were significantly better, like Hard to Earn, as well as the undisputed masterpiece, Moment of Truth. That being said, DJ Premier still does some solid work here, and the amount of promise that he shows is definitely something that he would expand upon more in future releases, to be certain. The lyricism here certainly isn't bad either, though admittedly it does lack a sense of power that Gang Starr really need to be totally successful on Step in the Arena. While there definitely are hints of the intelligent mixture of philosophy and braggadocio that Gang Starr would later become very well known for and very well remembered for, it just doesn't land as well as it could overall, and generally speaking, it feels slightly weaker than what they would otherwise be capable of on other records. However, I will say that Step in the Arena is actually quite strong in its first half. I don't really have any particular problems with it, or at least not any really major problems until the second half of the album. The latter half of the record is largely built upon very short songs, and some of those songs go on for less than 2 minutes, but at the same time, they aren't interludes per se, even though they are at the length of your average interlude, but they aren't interludes, they aren't skits, they're actual songs, they're just songs that should have been in the oven longer than they were. While this definitely could work, and it did work for a number of similar acts at the time, it just doesn't work for Gang Starr. They require a longer format for their individual songs to be truly successful. It's because all of these elements are being put together that are normally very helpful towards Gang Starr's music, but they just don't really get time to mold together too terribly well, and ultimately it just feels like a handful of half-finished songs just dashed on the backside of this record for the sake of having more songs in a longer length. Some songs, like Game Plan, don't even technically feel like proper songs. Again, they are proper songs, but they don't feel like it. Rather, they just feel like utterly pointless transitions that really serve no purpose on the album and ultimately hurt the cohesiveness of it rather than assist it. While these tracks in particular are obviously meant to some extent to be the glue that holds Step in the Arena together, I honestly don't think they do that at all. I think they do the exact opposite and ultimately result in a record that is significantly more choppy sounding than it would be without them. So overall, Step in the Arena is definitely a good listen, and it's worth your time for its historical importance alone in the history of hip-hop, but at the same time, it is far from perfect. I'm going to give Step in the Arena 3.5 stars out of 5. My one take on this album is that although it's a solid listen, it definitely isn't one that really hints at any sort of future legendary status for Gang Starr, which they, obviously would get later on. Even DJ Premier and Guru as individual people would get legendary status, but this record certainly doesn't hint at it. Overall, Step in the Arena just really has solid work from Guru and DJ Premier, but still very infantile work compared to what they would eventually be capable of, and for the most part, the lyricism and the general performances are lesser than what you might expect from Gang Starr if you've heard later releases from the duo. That being said, I would still recommend this album to people that want to get into the history of the hip-hop genre more and more. It doesn't matter what kind. This is a pretty prominent album. It's a very well-loved album, and it's also the album that basically sparked Gang Starr's career, and that's kind of important in and of itself. Gang Starr are easily one of the most noteworthy hip-hop duos of all time, but still, I wouldn't recommend this to anybody that's particularly into hyper-modernized hip-hop, super creative hip-hop. I wouldn't recommend it to that crowd. Just someone who can easily vibe with a certain sound and look past certain weaknesses in regards to songwriting and other similar qualities in music that could otherwise affect a person who is overly critical about music, such as myself. But again, 3.5 stars out of 5. And with that being said, that's the end of this review, and I'll see you guys in the next one.